our new series. Oops! We start off our new series of lunchtime talks, and they come out of a conversation with Bo Stevenson, which is really about how we deal with crisis in our lives. And you probably know Bo, and you know that he's got some novel ideas which stimulate our own thoughts. And so we thought the best thing to do to start off the series was to get Bo to speak to the series. So, welcome, Bo. You've been here many times. We will invite you back.
Fingers crossed.
So, please give us your talk, and we'll enjoy it. Thank you.
Hello. You're probably wondering why there is a Chinese character on the front of the series here. And it's because of my cousin, who is a professor of Chinese in Kansas. And we have an agreement with each other that we won't go out to dinner together because we never get around to eating. We talk the whole time and the food goes cold. The fascinating thing which I learned from him, and also the book which I got from him, is the origin of Chinese characters. And since I am a visual person, I was intrigued as to why the Chinese actually choose particular characters to convey something. The Chinese word for love is combining mother-baby. The Chinese for crisis is when you're in crisis, you feel it in the stomach. And so the Chinese character is where you're bent over like this. And that is a sign for danger. It hits you in the stomach. Next to it is a drawing, and all Chinese characters are originally drawn, and they're all in this book. And if I can't sleep, then I read it, and then I don't go to sleep until 4. Because you begin to look at why they put things together. But the one for danger, that's for danger, where you're scrunched up, holding your stomach. And opportunity is the picture of a soldier standing next to a wood, watching the grass for the first signs of movement. And therefore, what it actually says is if you put the two together, if you look very carefully at your crisis, it will give you a gift. What is the gift that it gives? Well, the gift is the same as your car. You do realize when you drove here that your car brought you here with a series of controlled explosions. Petrol or diesel is very volatile. And what do? They ignite it. But they ignite it in a carefully planned way so that you don't go up into smoke, something needs adjusting. But if your car goes forward, then in fact, you're aware. So we wouldn't learn anything unless they gave us a nice crisis, and those are called exams. And therefore, because you have an exam, they have programmed in a crisis, and that keeps you looking at the books. And therefore, unless you have crisis, we don't learn anything. But what if the crisis is too heavy? The crisis might feel that it's destroying us. So how do we keep a crisis, or grief, or a tragedy, in a sense of proportion, so that we grow and we mature? And perhaps it's the crisis of having been there, which is the total source of our compassion for other people with the crisis. So, one of my favorite stories, which I'm going to bore you with at the moment, I might have told it before, is the story of the Chinese farmer. And the Chinese farmer, who was very, very wise, one day his horse ran away. And the neighbors gathered and said, how very, very sad that your horse has run away, because your horse you used for plowing, and now you can't plow anymore. What bad news. And the Chinese farmer said, who was very wise, bad news, good news, maybe so, maybe not. Do you know, not 3 days passed before the farmer's horse came back leading 6 wild horses. What good news, they said. You had no horse and now you have 7. What good news? Good news, bad news. Maybe so, maybe not. Well, his son decided that he would like to tame one of the horses so they could use it. And he fell off, and he broke his arm. The neighbors gathered. What bad news. Your only son who does your plowing has now broken his arm, and he's totally useless. What bad news. Maybe so, maybe not, said the wise Chinese farmer. Not a week passed before the Chinese army came. They conscripted every able-bodied person and took them away to war. But of course they left the farmer's son, for what use is someone with a broken arm, to the army on a march. So, therefore, the Chinese are right. Even as we face a crisis, the Chinese say, look at the character. Look at the grief, feel it, do your mourning, but don't forget the opportunity, because that's going to be there. My other favorite story, which I've probably told before, is about a man in Italy whose donkey stalled on a bridge, and he was blocking all traffic with his cart. He tugged and he pulled, and the donkey wouldn't move. A bystander came and said, you'll need the donkey expert, which lives in the village. So he was sent for. And he talked to the donkey, he gave it a tug, he whispered in its ear, nothing worked. So he picked up a 4x2 and gave him a mighty thwack between the ears. What are you doing to my donkey, the owner asked. He said, well, first you have to get their attention. So the idea of a crisis is like a car, that it takes our attention and makes us observant to something that we might be blind for. And in that, the crisis can become quite creative. I was looking at Robert Wright here, and I have one of his pictures. because it's so profound theologically. And I bought the picture because Paul Tillich said, if you want to have my life meaning, stand right next to nothingness and look into the void. And it will hit you in the pit of the stomach. But then, as you stand there, dead scared, look at where you're standing. Because you're standing on some form of reality. And Robert's beautiful picture shows a white block next to darkness. And there's a red square saying, look here. Look at the growing edge between nothingness and where you're standing. Because where you're standing is actually your religion. Religion is where we choose to stand and make what is important, important. So, anyway, so that the principle is before insight comes, you have to have a crisis. And sometimes this is called the fall upwards. And the fall upwards counters gravity because it takes us to a new level of looking at things. And just like a car, your car moves forward with a series of controlled explosions. I had a dear friend who was a fellow chaplain, and somebody was really punishing themselves a lot just by giving themselves the bad time. And so she said, you know, I count my blessings that I'm not you. Now, how's that for understanding counseling? You really punish yourself. And the person said, well, how do I stop? And creatively, she said, I want you to have a guest narrator in your head for the next week. Ordinarily, you moan, punish, whine, and boss. But if you want, I want a guest speaker inside your head. I can't think of who to have this time. He said, well, I'm going to make a suggestion. You have to have Don French as Vicar of Dibley in your head, narrating everything that happens to you this week. A week passed and they came back. How was it? Well, I laughed for 3 days. I've never seen anything so funny. Life is just full of funny. And I'd never realized it until I put a guest speaker inside my head to replace my nagging. But then it became too superficial. So I replaced Dawn French. She said, who did you put in? I put in my grandmother. Her voice is in my head now. She's so kind, so practical. She has such a beautiful way of looking at tragedy. Oh, well, let's see what comes of it. She's nourishing. And I never knew that my dear grandmother could be so portable. And then I thought, well, this is great. So occasionally I invite a guest speaker inside my head to narrate for a while, and just to look at life through the guest speaker's way of looking at things. And that way, I get lots of different things, ways of looking at what's happening to me. I'm also a group analyst, and one of the things is that we have voices inside our head, which are different ages. But on the training course, I ask people to write down not only which characters are in their head, but what their age is. So I said, for instance, put down your chronological age first, which they do. Then I said, okay, now put your age in terms of your wisdom. And you don't have to stop at 100 if you want, if you're very wise. What is your age mechanical ability? Okay, I'm 6 years old, I hope you're older. Now, how old are you financially? How old are you in terms of what you do best? And you may be nearly a century old. Now, the most important one, you have a team inside your head. With what voice does your prime minister talk to the team? Is it bossy? Is it supportive? Does it have a sense of humor? Because the prime minister, the part that arranges the team inside us, can change the crisis that we face by using all the different parts of ourselves working together, so that everybody is a group. Every one of us is a group, as well as an individual. And groups themselves do have characters to it. So you can actually feel the atmosphere of a church, of a group. And I was once sitting in the hospital doctor's sitting room having a cup of coffee. And two people in the room had been having an argument and really fighting. The fight had stopped into a sort of hostility. And one of the other doctors came in. The coffee machine was over there. He just made a U-turn and says, I can't drink my coffee in an atmosphere like this. He just picked up the atmosphere. But nobody was actually arguing at the time, but he could just feel it. And I think churches have atmospheres. So therefore, how do we fall upwards rather than fall down? How do we have a creative crisis rather than one that is solely negative? And the primary premise of all psychology is that all learning is done through frustration. All learning is done through frustration. I am eternally grateful to my parents for taking away my bottle, because it would be so embarrassing to go into a pub and ask for my beer with a nipple on it. So by that bit of frustration, I learned how to drink out of a glass. So all of life is losing the way that we do something as an opportunity of learning a different way of actually doing it. So how do you keep it creative? How do we keep conflict friendly? Because all too often, our conflict leads to exhaustion. And so we are so worn down by what we have to face that we sometimes feel too tired to cope. One of the things is that we can lessen the frustration by our own inner voice, our own self, at least not joining in, but trying to do something creative. Now, one way which our doctor works, our doctor's work, is by vaccination. And vaccination is really quite a good thing. On this principle, my doctor has introduced me to polio, tetanus, typhoid, bird flu, swine flu, yellow fever, mumps, measles, and he's put all this stuff in my arm. Kind doctor. Why is the doctor doing that? He's vaccinating me. So what we do is to take conflict, take disease, and put it into a way which serves us rather than wears us down. Now, one of my moments of surprise is that a close friend of mine, who is Roman Catholic, asked me to attend her confirmation service. I had never been to a confirmation in the Roman Catholic Church before. This was several years ago. And what the bishop did was to confirm and then gently to slap the person. Why? And she said, well, what they told us is confirmation means that you use your faith to meet the crisis of life. So expect life to slap you, and as your bishop, I'm going to give you the first slap. So your faith is to help you deal with the slaps of life. It's not to say everything's going to be fine, but to give you that extra help to meet whatever challenges which you have. And so I said, vaccination. Oh, that works. We have another form of vaccination. We call it sport. What is a football game? A football game is a war which lasts for 90 minutes, hopefully without anybody getting killed. So Britain and Argentina went to war over the Falklands Malvinas. We also played them in 2012 Olympics at blind football. Which is better, to kill people or to play them in football? Now, if you can play them in football, you have the possibility of being king of the world for one whole year. You are the world champions. We're the best in the world. And they engrave your name in your country forever on this beautiful, beautiful trophy. Now, which is better? To go to war or to play football? So that works. And therefore, the football sort of acts as a controlled explosion, like our cars give us, and move us forward with a controlled explosion. And therefore we use what is potentially negative to move us forward. Now, the Old Testament, David and Goliath were put together to save lives. Save a life? Why? Well, you see, rather than two armies getting killed, you just had two champions. And therefore, you had a controlled war where only one person got killed. So, both armies agreed to have a champion, and therefore you had a controlled war with one person. Okay, pity about Goliath, he didn't understand about rocks. But David used what he was good at, which is to protect sheep, with being able to fling a rock accurately. So he used to fight his war the very instrument that he was good at. And the instrument that he was good at was not an aggressive thing. It was what he used to protect what was dear to him and his family. So he used something which was used for protection in a slightly different way. But he was good at rocks because he was good at defending the sheep who were very dependent upon his care. So we each have something particular which we do better than anybody else. And therefore, the idea is to use that in order to do it positively rather than negatively. And I didn't know the connection, but training as a psychotherapist, of course I had to be in therapy myself. And the therapist was very wise. He actually said, you do have a good sense of humor, and that defends you. But sometimes the way you use it is to keep people at bay. So I'm going to ask you to put a patch over your good eye. And while you're with me, not to be funny. Feel the pain grow. And then when you pick up your sense of humor again, it won't be to keep people at bay, but it will be to use them to make friends with themselves. So I had to go through a Lent of giving up something which served me well in order that I might better serve others. So sometimes it's not our problems which get in the way. Sometimes it's our strength. And sometimes we have to leave ourselves vulnerable by putting our strengths down and to be open. Now, Carl Gustav Jung wrote one sentence in one of his books which completely floored me and changed the way I look at the church. One word. He put it in Greek, so I had to look it up in the dictionary. My Greek's a bit rusty. What was the word? He put it in one sentence. Christianity works through a process of enantiodromia. Now, of course, you all know what enantiodromia is, just like me. What does it mean? Enantiodromia means, in Greek, to turn something on its head over and against the natural way of doing something. What? Enantiodromia means to turn something on its head, and it means over and against the natural. And he also said that people are healed symbolically. In other words, if you have a problem, which we're all wrestling with, if you find the right symbol, the symbol combines the two things which are warring and makes them one. And it works like a vaccination. Okay? May I shock you, please? Everything beautiful in the church is a taboo. Jews are not allowed to drink blood. We eat the body and blood of Christ, sacramental cannibalism. Mary was impregnated by her Father in heaven, incest. We drown little babies 3 times. That's not very friendly. Nuns have a polygamous same-gender marriage. And Jesus married John as his last act on the cross in the Gospel of John. So every single one is a taboo which has been made spiritual by elevating it symbolically. And this tells us how we are healed. That we take the very thing which we're fighting which we're prejudiced against. Put a transforming symbol in it and open up a whole new world. And I thought, maybe now I can have a glimpse of how to be a spiritual director, of helping the person through hearing, understanding, and exploring together for the right symbol to put what we've been wrestling with as a means of bringing us closer to God. Now that is turning contradiction into a blessing, if not a sacrament. So if life has given you one emotional leg or physical leg shorter than the other, you have a vocation to be a curb sweeper. You're built for the job, providing you're going in the right direction. Otherwise you'd have general. So, there we are. And so the idea is that we can identify and use our own difficulties as a means of identifying with somebody else with the problem. So we don't want to be perfect people. We want to use our difficulties as raw material for understanding other people who are troubled. And sometimes if people come for therapy, they said, "Would you cure me of my hang-up?" And I said, "Good heavens, no! Why would I do that? I make a living out of my hang-ups." They said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "I'm no good at small talk, so people pay me to listen to them, okay? Please don't take away my problem, because I'll be a failure as a therapist. I'll stop listening, I'll stop talking." So you don't know how nervous I am now talking to you, but I'm nervous. Because I'm doing something I find difficult. I'm much better at listening, maybe. So the other thing is, how do you use suffering in a transcendent way? Now, what we do is we take suffering, and what we combine it with is, if we combine it with the ideal, it becomes transformative. And we've all seen a picture of this happening, but we probably didn't realize it. Think of Princess Diana and the popularity which she had, both as a royal and as a person, and with her beauty. She was right up here. And then she picked up a child with AIDS and hugged it. And at the time, people were really afraid of AIDS. And here was this beautiful person from the royal family, cuddling something, a human being, a little baby, who was suffering from a terrible disease. That was transformative worldwide. Because you had the ideal and the dangerous brought together. And it was truly sacramental. Because it combined two opposites. And one of the things is that if you've noticed a flock of birds, each bird has its own identity. But a flock of birds has a common mind around the whole flock. And so they can all change together because they have a common mind uniting individuals. And the world has a common mind, too. And sometimes we forget that. And in the tragedies and hate and war in the world, we have a common mind of the beauty of the holiness as individuals, but we also have it as a group. And so what we can do as a group of caring people is that when you multiply it as a group, it has a very powerful impact. And therefore, people can go into a healing group and feel put back together again. And that can be something which is just the welcomingness of a group of people towards a stranger who is uncertain, afraid, and hurting. And they can feel it when they walk in to a church and say, I'm home. I've never seen these people before, but I'm home. And that is within all of our power to do it. So anyway, there is a healing in it. And the healing can take surprising things. One of my favorite people in the psychiatric hospital where I work came in very proudly and says, guess what? The doctor told me I was a schizophrenic. I said, well, congratulations. He said, not everybody's a schizophrenic, you know? And what it gave me, it was part of my training, is to recognize the sacramental in the ordinary. And I'll finish with a particular story. I arrived late one day, and there were no parking spaces. Maybe you have experienced the same thing in Oxford yourself, but at the hospital there was no parking spaces. There was one left, and it was already occupied, not by a car, but by a lady who was talking to a lamppost. And I thought, well, I'm late for work. Maybe I hope the conversation will be brief that she will have with the lamppost. It wasn't brief. It went on, and I waited. And eventually she finished, and I parked. But she was not the type of lady to talk to lampposts, because I knew her. I said, okay, what's up? And she said, I have no living relative on earth. And I met somebody who had no living relative on earth. And we sat down and we said, what did we miss the most? And she said, we both agreed that what we missed the most is we never got a gift. Never. Not for Christmas, nothing. So we decided we'd fix that. So from Monday to Wednesday, I would go to the shop, get her cigarettes, chocolate, and a surprise. And from Thursday to Saturday, she would go to the shop, bring back for me some cigarettes, chocolate, and a surprise. And that way, we had a gift every single day of our lives. And I said, you know, I think you're not far from the kingdom of God. Thank you. Thank you. I've learned something. And I think it's the gift of love, which actually is a transforming thing.